Hi, this is Dr. Will Tuttle. I'd like to talk about herderism. This is the foundation and core of our society. I think it's essential that we understand this basic idea that all of us have been born into a culture that's organized at its living core around owning animals as property for food. That's called herding, H-E-R-D, herding. And this herding culture, as I discussed in the World Peace Diet, arose in what is today Iraq around 10,000 years ago, and did about 6 or 7 primary things. And the culture that we live in today is an extension. It's a historical direct descendant of that herding culture. We're still eating the same way. We're still living in a herding culture. We don't think of that. We don't realize it. We think of ourselves as living in an industrialized, computerized, urbanized society, but actually it is simply that the herding of animals has become industrialized and computerized. We're killing millions of animals every day, actually billions. We include all the sea animals. And the imprisonment of animals, the killing and the feeding of these animals is industrialized, and it's hidden and it's invisible. But it is the core of our society. It's our primary relationship with the earth and with animals and with each other is dictated by and is organized around animal agriculture. So it's very important to understand this basic idea if we want to understand why we have the problems we're having, not only individually but also collectively, and how we can solve these problems. So the fundamental mentality of herding animals is reducing them, reductionism, reducing animals to mere commodities, to objects. So this is number one. The first thing that happened with herding animals, it was wild sheep originally about 10,000 years ago, and wild goats, and about 2,000 years later, wild cows, and then other animals. These animals became property to these people in the ancient world, and so their status was reduced, and the status of all animals in general was reduced, because either they're property or they're pests. They may interfere with my wealth, and animals became wealth. So the status of animals gradually was reduced. And remember, this whole revolution, the herding revolution, was a slow revolution. It took thousands of years, but very gradually these things happened. So number one, animals were reduced. Number two, we had the arising of a wealthy elite class. And this wealthy elite class was wealthy and elite basically for one reason. They owned the most livestock. Livestock were wealth. So whoever owned the most cows and sheep and goats became the king, essentially. And we can read about this if we read the ancient texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament writings, the ancient Greek plays and writings, and Babylonian texts and so forth. It's very clear that these ancient kings were powerful because they owned livestock. That was the source of their power, and they controlled not only the economic lives but also the political and even the religious lives of the people that they were dominating, essentially. So we had, for the very first time on the planet, we had, first of all, the ownership of animals, the enslavement basically of other beings. Number two, that gave rise to a wealthy elite class which is dominating everyone else, a tiny elite. The whole fascination with bloodlines, of course, is part of animal agriculture and plays into this with the kings and their bloodlines. Number three, we had the arising of war, because essentially these kings had the natural desire, as time went on, to become more wealthy and more powerful. And the ancient word capita, which means head, as in head of sheep and goats and cows, capita and capital. Capital was desired, right? The more sheep and goats we can have. So the best way to increase one's capital, one's wealth, was to go and fight against someone who had a lot of wealth, another king. And if you won that fight, then you would get all of their wealth. That was the spoils of war was the livestock. So the very first word for war on this planet that we know of is the ancient word gavia, which means the desire for more cows. So this animal agriculture gave rise to this wealthy elite class, to the proto-capitalist system of control of the means of production of wealth by a small minority, a wealthy elite. And then war, of course, is a natural outcome of this. to increase wealth, and we see this still today. People understand, I think, that one of the primary reasons of going to war is to increase wealth and power. And then whoever lost the war became the property of the victors. So this gave rise, number 4, to slavery, human slavery. It's a small step from animal slavery to human slavery. Whoever lost the war was the property, and they were impregnated against their will, the same way the animals were, to get more slaves, and slaves were also a form of wealth. So this led to the arising of a very violent, warlike, patriarchal culture in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Women status was also reduced because in animal agriculture, basically the female is seen more and more as merely a breeder. So animals are reduced in status and they're just slaves. Pretty soon women are also bought and sold just like chattel property. And we can see that when we read these ancient texts that go back about 3,000, 3,500 years ago. We have the first writings, and we can read very clearly how these people were buying and selling animals as well as women. And women are just here to be used, basically, the way female animals are here to be used. This is what animal agriculture does. And then finally, of course, we have the role model of boys to emulate, being the role model of a hard, tough, disconnected male capable of violence against animals and against rival herders and against women. And there is no more devastating force on this planet than hard, tough, disconnected males, but animal agriculture requires this. So this is the basic thing to understand, that animal agriculture gives rise to the reduction of animals and the creation of a wealthy elite class dominating everyone, and war and slavery and suppression and domination, exploitation of women as well, and boys becoming hardened. And so to see that there's another way of living, that as we move toward a plant-based way of eating and living, the old word in Greek that we get our word diet, it's dieta, literally meant a way of living, a way of life, a manner of living. So a vegan or plant-based way of living liberates animals and creates the foundation, actually, of a world where we have harmony. So we can see very clearly we have, instead of lack and competition, we have a possibility of abundance, we have the possibility of healthy ecosystems, we have a foundation for healthy economies, we have a foundation for healthy people, and for more freedom and justice and equality, as well as harmony and peace in our relations. So this is a beautiful vision to understand, that herding animals makes it literally impossible, because we are required, when we harm animals and imprison them, to cultivate these dimensions, not only in our attitudes, but in the world outside of us. And this is what has historically happened. And now we're in the midst, I think, of a benevolent revolution or evolution to return to another way of living, to come home to our hearts and realize that as we liberate animals, we're liberating ourselves, we're liberating the sacred feminine dimension of life, we're creating the possibility of harmony and peace and justice and freedom and equality in our individual lives and in our collective lives. So this is why going vegan and moving to a plant-based way of eating and living for ethical reasons is so healing. It's such a vital part of our cultural awakening now. So I hope that all of us can make an effort to understand these ideas, to bring our lives into alignment with these ideas, and to create a post-herding culture, a culture based on plant-based agriculture, where we can feed everyone on a fraction of the land and be healthy and create the possibility of much healthier and more awakened societies. Thank you so much for all of your efforts.